January 1st, 2018. My name is Kuldip Randhawa. I live in Surrey, BC, a province of Canada, a nation that's considered at the forefront of human rights. I have done a number of videos on YouTube that exposes the various frauds that have taken place in British Columbia mostly against me by people of power and privilege. Those individuals that consider themselves to be lawful, respecting the law when they do not, when they've taken an oath to uphold the law. They have failed the rule of law, and they've broken numerous laws and committed crimes against humanity. I have actually seen the Queen's message in 2017. It focuses on technology. It focuses on families. The message by the Queen to the world often is heard by all of the subjects in the realm and the nations that she is the head of state of, but it seems that some of that message doesn't quite get through to Christians. We live in a world where there are double standards. This video has been made by myself, having tried and attempted, having endured the pain and suffering which my family has suffered as well, even though it's considered that most Sikhs are not individuals that can tolerate suffering because we're required to be exceptional people in the way that we think. But we cannot remain silent. We must speak out the troubles that are taking place in this world where people are being victimized within the court system itself by Christians. And some of those activities are taking place against other Christians who come to court to speak the truth. The prejudice that's taking place now is not one based on color. It's discrimination at the worst. It's racial prejudice in which Macedonians, Greeks, Italians, if you happen to be a minority, where the politicians will ignore you and Parliament will ignore you to such an extent that they will make some necessary steps just to convince the public that something is being done. But that is actually short term. This message is by a Sikh. It's a Christmas message done by a Sikh who has been victimized by numerous Christians and also people of the Sikh faith who are subjected to cultural exploitation. So they're not behaving as Sikhs. The exploitation that takes place is all based upon old thinking, which cannot exist anymore because we are not going to control nations. The Sikhs don't want that. I think there have been many empires established in the past. They are short-lived when you consider the lifespan of the earth. So this message, having seen the message by the Queen, as I always do listen to the message of hope. I am a British subject living in Canada, in British Columbia. And this video is about my story in appealing to everyone. In particular, it's a reminder to Christians who have lost their faith, it seems. And so there's a certain disrespect that has taken place when Christians within the court system itself, judges, lawyers, having taken the oath of the Queen to be loyal and be subject to the rule of law, have disrespected my Queen. There is a certain loyalty that exists between the subject and the Queen. When I became a British citizen, I debated quite a lot within my mind of how I can be loyal. At a time soon after the events that happened in India in 1984, I gave up my Indian passport. Others actually changed their outlook. Some were Sikhs who were wearing turbans, who were previously clean-shaven. it affected a lot of people in different ways. It has certainly affected me. But being loyal to the Queen, I recognized in history that through suffering, a lot has actually occurred. If you consider some of the events in history, take the First Nations, for example, and the residential school issues. There has been considerable suffering taking place, and because of that suffering, people are able to relate with each other. A lot of Christians, Canadians, speak very highly of the First Nations because of that suffering, now that it was exposed, previously concealed. And there's a special trust that now exists between Canadians and the First Nations, so that the healing can take place, so that those mistakes will not be reoccurring again in history. Even though that view is not shared by all First Nations, there is a step in the right direction when the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau apologized to the First Nations. Going further back in time, in India, which was then under the British rule, the event that took place by a general of the British Army, General Dyer, where he attempted to massacre up to 2,000 Sikhs who were basically attending a speech of few individuals who were giving a speech about the rule of British in India. These included women and children. They were not militant. They were attending a function on Baisakhi Day. That event went down in history as a horrid event in which General Dyer was considered as the butcher of Amritsar, condemned by politicians such as Sir Winston Churchill, who clearly wanted a court-martial because these were crimes against humanity. These were attacks on civilians. There was no war going on at that time. So these were actually crimes against humanity. And as a result of that suffering, my Queen has actually apologized to the Akal Takht, to the Sikhs, and for that I thank you. Followed by another apology by David Cameron, the Prime Minister of England. That apology was generally given because I believe that my Queen, having lived through the Second World War, having been involved within the actual service of British people, my Queen actually does relate to the human suffering. That is actually a unique thing that is essential here. And so the apology given by my Queen to the Sikh people is a step in the right direction. That has resulted in a special relationship, I believe, between the Sikhs and the British people. We need to build on that. Through human suffering, people can realize what is taking place here. And so, in order to recognize that what has happened in the past as mistakes, we cannot have them repeated in different forms, in different shapes. And the technology that is taking place, it seems that more technology there is, more advancement there is, some people on this earth apparently should be becoming wiser, more educated, more understanding. But it seems to me that some are becoming stupid, becoming fools. So it doesn't matter how much progress one makes from a technological point of view. The problems that are occurring to me do not require considerable acumen. It requires simple thinking, common sense, which apparently is not so common. But the Christian faith is on test now. And so are some Sikhs who have actually been exploited to such a level that they're not behaving as Sikhs through the cultural exploitation. So what is my story? As a British subject, I moved to Canada in 1994 with my family under the point system coming to British Columbia, where I thought I would be openly welcome, because as a British citizen I felt that the discrimination did not exist there. I was wrong. That has been proven to me beyond a reasonable doubt. The discrimination I'm talking about is not what one would expect of a person walking on the road, where one person has lost his job to a Sikh person who's got higher education. So he feels angry, so he starts attacking the Sikhs and removing the turbans and beating them up. The type of attacks that once occurred 30-40 years ago in England. The tax that I'm talking about now is basically far greater. It's about destroying a person's life who's speaking the truth. It doesn't matter the color of his skin. It doesn't matter whether he's a Sikh or whether he's a Christian. If you go to court and speak the truth, you'll be victimized. So this is why I say that the faith is under test. The number of videos that have been posted by myself, considering numerous frauds, will indicate that the first fraud by APEC BC, which is the Engineering Association, with a mandate to regulate under the Engineers Act, has actually broken the law. They have committed criminal offenses where a person is being set up because he happens to belong to a community that is culturally exploited and somewhat controlled, who under duress will behave differently. Out of the fear of speaking the truth, they may lose their jobs. And so they do not come forward. And then the attacks continue. A water tank that had no water pipes. So it cannot be filled, it cannot be emptied, in the same way that a car without tires cannot be driven. These are simple statements that one can understand. It does not require to be a scientist or an engineer. But the fraud for this to occur is so considerable because it involves numerous organizations. Most of these organizations are with power and money and influence. So the politicians are remaining silent. So all of the oath that is taken in Her Majesty's name, or take the CRA for example, Department of Justice will go to court and they will submit fraudulent material. They would coerce and collude with people who are told not to make an appearance, because the intent is to target the one person by turning other partners, former brothers, against me. So now the families that we once existed, that we loved each other, the love that existed in the families, is being taken away. So we talk about the Christmas message as being a message for families. Well, if there has to be some meaning, then we must put an end to the cultural exploitation. Because the trust that exists between people is eroded on a daily basis. The problems that I've actually endured are in excess of 10 years. Starting off with the APEC fraud, a water tank that was not a water tank at all, just an object of fraud as stated in my book, Absolute Privilege to Deprive. It then carried on into other businesses of mine where former partners, members of the Sikh community who did some service to the Sikh community, because there are Sikhs with turbans and they present themselves as renowned people, and so the Sikh image is being preserved, and so the majority of the Sikhs remain silent because we are so focused on creating an image of the Sikhs that they would commit crimes, theft, steal. And then CRA, which is supposed to be investigating the fraud because they did do the fraud in fills being stolen, the wind machine being stolen, all of that has been put before the court, where lawyers would go to court and make a deal with the people who are in the style of cause. So they get benefits, unjust enrichment, which is another word, fancy word for legalized theft. And then it carries on to the Gateway Building Management fraud, which is a company that I have in the proceedings S111030. I mention that now because that is one proceeding in which the Chief Justice, Christopher Hinkson, has appointed Judge Murray, in my view, to provide justice, having written an affidavit to Parliament with evidence, sworn by a notary public that is known to me. And so this sworn affidavit resulted in the Chief Justice issuing an order ex mero moto. And so in my view, I thought Judge Murray was going to put an end to the fraud. And an application was set for a case planning conference, which is what's required in the first appearance before this judge, because the previous judge, who was Judge Bernier, who was seized in these proceedings, had been removed. It's clear that Judge Bernier did not go to the extent of what Judge Murray has done, which is basically have me assaulted, attacked, put down, and put into a jail cell, and then my lands were stolen. So there was no case planning conference. In a so-called 45-minute, which was before another trial that she was adjudicating in New Westminster, because the proceedings were in Vancouver, and I thought things were being shifted there to put an end to the activities that were now realized by the judges, having written numerous correspondence in which my shares have been stolen. And some matters have still not been adjudicated because an application, a proceeding S123329, was allowed by Judge Bernier for damages. So now you have a judge who is actually not there to give justice and has actually committed a crime within the courts when the orders of the Chief Justice were disregarded. That's contempt of court. And when I actually raised some concerns, requested an adjournment so I can call 911 to have the police attend so I can file a criminal complaint because I've had enough, I was arrested, taken down. And the lands were sold on the premises that all actions have been concluded, despite the fact that Chief Justice had issued orders ex mero moto. And then on the same day, on June 8th, I was released in the lunch break after being mistreated in the cell. That may be the subject of a separate video. But having been released, I was reassured by Judge Murray that now a case planning conference is going to be heard on June 22nd, 2017. She stated I was an intelligent person, having read my material, my chambers binder of 1.5 inches thick, for my application that required 1 day, which has not even been heard. But yet orders have been entered stating that I'm appearing before the court. Well, how can I appear before the court when I'm in a jail cell? These are things that don't need to be debated. This is open crime that's taking place here. It's crime by the many against the few, so that the voice of reason can be actually eradicated, eliminated, so no one will speak the truth. Now there's politicians who want to legalize some drugs. I guess the few people who do have a voice will be told to shut up in the future because they'll be half doped with drugs. So what's happened to the First Nations is now happening to the Canadian public. And it's happening with the full knowledge that these crimes are not going to be investigated. And so the Christmas message by the Queen is respected by Christians and by myself as a British subject. And I don't need to appeal to the Queen, because the British monarch is an institution like no other. Most people do not understand. But having understood in becoming a British citizen, I respected the monarch. I am loyal to the Queen. I am fulfilling my duty in informing my Queen that the crimes taking place here have to be investigated immediately. Often things are done at your convenience, I understand. But this is a matter when the suffering is considerable. From a community that has done so much for the world and have fought for the British in the past are being exploited. We need to look at history and some of the good reasonings that were given by the politicians such as Sir Winston Churchill, who clearly stated that when Sikhs were living a life in England after the World War II, that they should not have to remove their turbans because it's their right, it's part of their religion. And he reminded the British Parliament at that time that when they were fighting for our dignity, for England, we didn't tell them to take the turbans off, so why do we have to tell them now? This is the kind of reasoning that makes sense, because Sir Winston Churchill was a person who could relate to humanity, who could understand the Sikhs. We are a peaceful people, but we do fight for justice. That is our right. We are not a people that will remain silent. And the event that took place on June 8th, 2017, before Judge Murray, is a game changer. It was a big mistake. I guess you think that you can quieten a Sikh. Well, that's not going to happen. I didn't come here to start any organization or non-profit organization. I came here because I thought that there was no discrimination in British Columbia. I'm now telling the world that there is, and something needs to be done about it with Godspeed. As someone who's so close to God, this message is not a reminder to the Queen in reminding her of her faith. I think she is someone who fully understands the faith and has impeccable faith, in fact. But this is a reminder to other Christians, and this message by a Sikh soon after Christmas and the New Year is for a new beginning. It's to remind Christians of who Christianity is all about, of their faith. Because just as God is present everywhere, the Queen is also present in the courtroom when the portrait or a picture is proudly put up on the wall as a constant reminder to the judges who have taken an oath that everything that happens in the courtroom is under her authority, and the respect must be maintained, and the oath has to be fulfilled. And if the oath is not fulfilled, then the post of the judge or the politician does not exist, because no politician can support fraud, and no judge can support fraud. Judge Murray has actually committed a felony in my view, and that is now a separate matter, because when you try to conceal the fraud, it's going to expand. And the way this fraud works is you spread it out to various organizations. And the people who have been bestowed with powers on behalf of the Queen to look after her interest have to be fulfilled. They have to act swiftly. And if they don't, then they are going to bring dishonor to the monarchy and to my Queen. I have done my part by alerting the world of what's taking place in British Columbia. I think the problem may be extensive right across Canada, but it's mostly focused in British Columbia. So what does one do to put an end to this, other than what I've just said in my message to Christians? Is perhaps a reminder of reading some text from the Bible. And so, even though Sikhs respect other religions, I don't think many Sikhs have ever actually gone this far of reading text from the Bible, but I'm doing it under the special circumstances that exist here. Because someone has to take the first step, and I've taken that first step. It's not my last step, but it is the first step that I need to take in order to remind everybody that we cannot continue in this fashion. Do not exploit the Sikhs. The first verse is from Exodus 23, verse 1 to 9. I'm actually reading these verses from the New International Version, and this particular quote is on laws of justice and mercy. And I quote, "Do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd, and do not show favoritism." That is pretty clear. The judge of the court has to look at the merits. It's very easy to assess the fraud has taken place when reasons of judgment are issued that do not comply with the conclusions of law which are in the order. This investigation by the police would not be difficult to do. You have to understand the legal process. You go before a judge, you present the facts, the judge is a trier of fact, and based on merits, he considers all of the evidence in reaching a conclusion of law. And so the reasons of judgment are in that judgment. That is the evidence that the judge has accepted, that cannot be disputed, nor does it need to go to the Court of Appeal, because the order given by Judge Bernier, which is the shareholding order, I'm focusing on this one quite considerably now, is actually in my favor. And so the conclusions of law can be altered in the same way that the action S111030 was sealed by an order made by Judge Bernier. And that order was then varied because it prevented the access of that file to counsel acting for myself and my former brother in the proceeding. And that was beyond the 30-day limit. So the Court of Appeal is not for simple tasks which have already been adjudicated and are actually res judicata. All they require is the order that was made to comply with the conclusions of law. The reasons of judgment don't have to be changed. The conclusions that are derived from the reasons of judgment can be changed. If the reasons of judgment have to be changed, then one has to proceed to the Court of Appeal. That's the difference here. One does not have to go to the Court of Appeal and waste the time there. It's simplistic. But it seems I live in a province where lawyers are persuaded to walk away from you and misguide you. And the theft that has taken place, in which close to $3 million has been sent to my former brother, who's stolen the money, who still actually owes me a loan, if you look at the reasons of judgment. But to do that, one has to be unbiased, not involved in fraud, who does not discredit the Queen. That is not difficult to do. Simply changing a judge was a good step. But when the fraud is considerable, they will go to extreme measures. And they've already done that. And it's still continuing. If you now go on further, another phrase in the Bible, Numbers 15, verses 15 to 16. And I quote, "The community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreign residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. The same laws and regulations will apply both to you and to the foreigner residing among you." What that basically says is this: that Sikhs, Macedonians, Greeks, Italians, all of the minorities, including Canadians who are telling the truth, who want justice, are entitled to justice and to equal treatment. It is not reserved for the privileged classes. It is not reserved for those who are wealthy. It's right here in the Bible. One does not have to go too far. The faith that exists within the courts is a religious faith. If the people who are adjudicating are not one with the faith, then that is an illegal proceeding and disrespect to the Queen, which must terminate forthwith. Take that as a message from a Sikh who's reminding Christians of the Bible and the verses within there. And I will carry on reading some other verses under Amos 5:7-12. And I quote, "There are those who turn justice into bitterness and cast righteousness to the ground. For I know how many are your offenses and how great your sins. There are those who oppress the innocent and take bribes and deprive the poor of justice in the court." Do I really need to say anything on this verse? Is it difficult to understand for those judges who are learned individuals? That you cannot continue in this fashion. The Bible is the faith within the legal systems in most of the countries which are under the control of the monarchy or where the Queen is the head of state. That faith requires you to do the right thing. A Sikh should not have to remind you, but I've taken that step because it seems to me that you're not listening to Christians. You don't care about the Queen, you don't care about the rule of law. All you care about is getting rich and depriving justice of those who deserve it. And so what happens when unjust laws exist? Another quote in the Bible, Isaiah 10 verses 1-3. "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. What will you do on the day of reckoning when disaster comes from afar? Question mark. To whom will you run for help? Question mark. Where will you leave your riches? Question mark." Most people who read the Bible will not say question mark. But there's a point I would like to make here. That this problem can be solved by a special decree that can be issued by my Queen, so that justice can be done immediately in those people who have been declared vexatious, because that is a mechanism of concealing the fraud. We have judges in the Supreme Court here that believe that water will flow uphill. And so this decree can put an end to the anguish that's taking place where families are being destroyed. And the question mark is really a question of reason, so that one can understand how to change, so we can understand that the change can take place and the reasons for why it needs to be taking place. Now I have put before various questions of reason before APEC BC. Tell me why a tank can be operational when there are no pipes going in to fill it and no pipes going out to empty it. And so they are fully aware, and so their approach up until now, up until June 8th, 2017, was to ignore me or declare me as vexatious thinking that by doing that, they can somehow conceal the fraud and carry on with it. Well, when the matter goes to the Queen, and it goes to the public, and the people of this nation lose total faith in the legal system, question of reason is, what do you think is going to happen? Go into history. The same events that took place in England when the police were ignoring the crimes, the Southall riots took place. I recall that because as a young boy, I was in the middle of a mathematics tuition and I was caught up and I could not go home because of the riot. So I had to stay at the teacher's place who was teaching me privately. But that's what happens when the law enforcement agencies ignore, the politicians ignore, and then the public is going to have to take control. One does not have to do that when one has a rule of law. So if the rule of law does not apply equally, then what does one do? So those individuals who feel that they have won because they have so much control, because it seems the crimes that are taking place are within the privileged classes. This is not a case where there's a dispute between the lower, middle, or upper classes, the social levels that exist within society. That's why you have the courts. But when the crimes are taking place within the courts, then there is no justice in a nation. And one does not have to make videos like this, but I have, because of the special circumstances. And so in reading from Jeremiah 17 verse 11, like the partridge that gathers abroad, that she did not hatch, so is he who gets riches, but not by justice. In the midst of his days they will leave him, and he will be a fool. This is what happens in British Columbia. It seems we have a province, despite the technology and the laws of physics, we have a number of fools. Fools who believe that a water tank can be filled without pipes. CRA who would come to court and say, in Her Majesty's name, and file taxes on lands when there's no taxes owed. This is a major fraud. And the signs are evident because you go to the CRA building, you can't even go inside the building anymore. One has to go to a phone for a period of time. Well, I've done that, I've left messages, so now even that has changed because now you have to go to a security officer and he will allegedly pass on the message or give you a leaflet where the phone number exists. So the people who are committing the crimes cannot be in touch with those who are being victimized. But when they come to court, the fraud is evident from the evidence. Simple reasoning, questions of reason, just like in the Bible. There are no taxes payable. And if you have a nation, the implications of this fraud taking place are quite serious. Because if you have a nation that is not operating under law, deceiving the public, then why does the public have to pay any taxes? Perhaps the public has considerable powers that they are not even aware of. But I'm hoping through this message that a change will take place by Her Majesty the Queen through a decree. And in bringing this message to an end, there's a few more verses. The next verse from the Bible is Proverbs 20:17. Food gained by fraud tastes sweet, but one ends up with a mouth full of gravel. this is the experiences that some people presently have. They think they have won. They don't realize the decency of mankind that I've offered in reaching out to Sikhs who have been exploited, in reaching out to politicians where I have been ignored, in approaching various law enforcing agencies who have remained silent and in fact have on occasions come to my door to threaten me. When a project of mine is being cancelled, often the security guard is sent out because they feel they can continue interfering with my projects through various ways in which now clients are walking away. So I'm not being overly judgmental because I think I may have to simply accept that some people are who they are. They cannot change. If you're a racist, you're gonna remain racist. But then don't expect us to continue saying that Canada is a great nation. It's at the forefront of human rights. I think we need to live together as we only have one nation. Some statutes and documents in America relating to immigration, they refer to as aliens. We are human beings. That is actually a word used in one of the previous versions of the Bible, which is incorrect. The correct terminology is a foreigner, just as I've read in the New International Version. We are not here to take over the world. We're not invading some foreign nation. We come here to start a life, to live a family. We bring income, having sold our properties in another nation. A considerable move. Doesn't come easy, but it's been done here. And so when a person is told to apply for a permanent residence card because it was expired, then the nationality is being changed on there. It's been stated I'm Indian when actually I'm a British citizen. So these are not mistakes that are taking place. There's another video on that one. And the fingerprinting issue, another video on that one. Because they think another person with my name has a criminal record, so therefore every Kuldip Singh Randhawa has to be treated like a criminal. Notwithstanding the fact that the other Randhawa who has my name may not be a criminal because of the exploitation that's taking place here. So I don't want to be overly judgmental. Under Matthew 7:1-2, judging others, it says, "Do not judge, or you will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the laws and the prophets. And let's imagine that we were to rule the entire country, an entire nation, as Christians. So there's only one religion. Well, there will never be one religion. That is a truth that has to be accepted. And under Matthew 16:26, it states, and I quote, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Question mark. So I've raised many question marks in the Bible, which are reasons of person understanding so that one can reason with oneself and put an end to this. This problem is not difficult to solve. When I wrote the numerous emails to Parliament, I actually even quoted a nursery rhyme. I'm not being disrespectful here, but this really is how serious the problem is and how ridiculous it is. The nursery rhyme where it says, "Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water." And in that rhyme, one does not question ever whether a person is going to be tumbling down or tumbling up. It's always going to be tumbling down. A child who goes to a nursery understands this. that water will flow downhill. When it rains, it's going to fall down. It's never the case that the terminology is rain rise. The word is rainfall. Same way waterfall, because the water falls off the ledge, it doesn't rise up into the heavens. This is how ridiculous it is. To find the fraud, one has to look at the documents in the courts, look at the proceedings, and compare the facts that were adjudicated or allegedly adjudicated before a judge, and then compare those to the reasons of judgment. And then one can conclude if this judge is actually worth remaining in the court. If a politician who is aware that a fraud has taken place, is that politician not actually supporting the fraud in remaining silent? Isn't that what the law says, that you cannot support it? What does one have to do? How many times does one have to go to court to tell a judge that what's happening here is incorrect? And the offense that took place, in which I was assaulted, is now possibly a main event that will never be forgotten by me. And the Sikhs have been told throughout the world. The Akal Takht has been approached, which is the sovereign body of the Sikhs. If perhaps you feel that that body can also be controlled, I don't think that's the case. But the will of Sikhs cannot be broken. We are not that people. We care for humanity. We have done so much for humanity. We want peace on earth. So with this message, even though one can feel the frustration that I'm feeling presently, perhaps it can be sensed by the person seeing this video, but it's a message of hope for everybody. I'm appealing to Her Majesty the Queen as a law subject to do something about this problem here in Canada, and perhaps other nations under your power as the head of state. So 2018 is a new beginning for the legal systems of various nations changing, perhaps. I can be contacted by email at kuldiprandhawa5@gmail.com, KULDIPRANDHAWA5@gmail.com. And before closing, Merry Christmas to everyone and Happy New Year.